December 2nd, 1993, a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin. The morning sun cuts through the haze that hangs over the city like a permanent bruise. In a nondescript two-story row house on Carrera 79B, a man with a full beard and long, unkempt hair sits by a window. He looks nothing like the photographs plastered across every police station in Colombia. Nothing like the man who once appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine as the 7th richest man on Earth. He picks up the phone, and in a hotel room across the country, a 16-year-old boy answers. His father, the most wanted man in the world. They talk about nothing in particular. School, his sister, the weather. Pablo Escobar knows the rules. Keep it under 2 minutes. Never stay on long enough for them to triangulate the signal. But it's his son, and tomorrow isn't guaranteed. So he stays on. Somewhere across Medellin, in an unmarked van packed with CIA-provided surveillance equipment, a young man named Hugo Martinez Jr. watches a signal lock on his screen. He reaches for his radio. "I've got him!" In the hotel room, Juan Pablo Escobar suddenly feels a chill run through him. Something in his father's voice, something in the silence between words. "You need to hang up, Dad." Pablo Escobar stays on the line. It would be his last conversation with his son. This is the story of how they found him. Not just the raid that killed him, but the entire 16-month manhunt that brought together Colombian police, American special forces, rival drug cartels, and death squads in an alliance so unholy that decades later, people still argue over whether the cost of killing one man was worth the demons it unleashed. This is the hunt for Pablo Escobar. Let me take you back 16 months to the night that everything changed. July 22nd, 1992, high in the mountains above Medellin, there was a prison that wasn't really a prison at all. La Catedral sat on 3 hectares of prime hillside real estate, built to specifications that would make a 5-star resort blush. It had a jacuzzi, a waterfall, a bar and disco, a soccer pitch so impressive that players from the Colombian national team came up to play matches. There was even a giant dollhouse because Pablo Escobar's daughter deserved only the very best, even when Daddy was supposedly serving time. The 40-some guards wore official prison uniforms, but they weren't prison guards. They were Escobar's sicarios, his killers. The Colombian army patrolled the perimeter, but they had no authority to step inside without advance notice. That was the deal Escobar had negotiated when he surrendered. And let's be clear about why Colombia agreed to those terms. You see, in the years leading up to his surrender, Pablo Escobar had waged the bloodiest terrorist campaign in Colombian history. He killed 3 presidential candidates in a single election cycle. He blew up a commercial airliner, murdering 107 people to assassinate a single politician who wasn't even on the plane. He detonated a truck bomb outside the intelligence headquarters in Bogota that killed 63 people, including children, in a daycare center. His organization paid bounties for dead police officers between $100 and $3,000 per cop, depending on their rank. Teenagers from the slums of Medellin hunted men in uniforms for pocket money. Over 500 police officers were murdered in a single city. So when Escobar finally agreed to stop the killing in exchange for a prison that he designed himself, a maximum 5-year sentence, and a constitutional ban on extradition to the United States, Colombia took the deal. I mean, what choice did they really have, right? One delegate to the Constitutional Assembly that voted to ban extradition reportedly said afterwards, "May God and country forgive us." But even from prison, Escobar couldn't stop being Escobar. The murders that ended the charade. In July 1992, Escobar summoned 2 of his top lieutenants to La Catedral, Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Kiko Moncada. He'd been skimming money. Worse, they'd been negotiating with the Cali cartel, Escobar's mortal enemies. What happened next comes from testimony by Escobar's chief sicario, a man who called himself Popeye. Pablo Escobar beat Fernando Galeano to death with a billiard cue, in his own prison, with his own hands. Moncada was killed by Escobar's henchmen. They dismembered and burned them in an oven. Their brothers, their bodyguards, their drivers, all dead. The widows, fearing they would be next, did something extraordinary. They went to the press. And suddenly all of Colombia knew that their most notorious criminal had turned his luxury prison into a murder factory. President Cesar Gaviria had no choice. On July 21, 1992, he ordered Escobar transferred to a standard military prison. Well, the operation was a disaster. When soldiers arrived at La Catedral, Escobar took the Vice Minister of Justice hostage with an Uzi to his head. As fog rolled over the mountain, it always came after 6 p.m., hampering any air assault, Pablo and 9 associates simply walked out through a pre-built escape route. A section of wall had been mortared with weak concrete that could be kicked open. They planned for this moment from the day the prison was built. A joke circulated at the US Embassy in Bogota. How many Colombian prison guards and soldiers does it take to let Pablo Escobar escape? Nobody was laughing in Washington. The man who controlled 80% of the global cocaine trade, who had murdered thousands, who had once considered running for president of Colombia, was loose again, and the greatest manhunt in history was about to begin. Within hours of Escobar's escape, phones were ringing in 3 countries. In Madrid, a Colombian police attaché named Hugo Martinez received orders to return home immediately. He was being given command of a reconstituted search block, the elite unit that had hunted Escobar before his surrender. 600 hand-picked men, all from outside Medellin to prevent local corruption. Trained by American special forces and backed by the most sophisticated surveillance technology on Earth. Martinez was chosen for one reason. Everyone who knew him believed he was impossible to corrupt. This would be tested immediately. Colonel Martinez, the incorruptible. Hugo Martinez was born on October 16, 1941, the son of a police colonel. He had already distinguished himself by helping kill Escobar's partner Rodriguez Gacha back in 1989. He knew what he was getting into. He knew what it would cost. In April 1990, during the first hunt for Escobar, a bomb destroyed Martinez's family apartment. His wife and children barely survived. Shortly after, a former police officer appeared at his door with what Martinez later described as a strained look. "I've come to you obligated," the man said. "If you'll let us know about the operations in advance, then $6 million will be deposited into any account of your choosing." Martinez asked who sent him. Pablo Escobar. $6 million in 1990 to simply give advance warning of raids? Think about that one for a moment. Think about what that money could mean for your family, for your children's futures, for generations. Martinez's response? Tell them you were never here. Escobar didn't take rejection well. He recorded threats he knew Martinez would hear through wiretaps. "Colonel, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill all of your family up to the 3rd generation, and then I will dig up your grandparents and shoot them and bury them again. Do you hear me?"
Esa gonorrea que se transó por $1.500.000, que es el que maneja esos operativos, esa gonorrea, cree que es porque es policía, que si yo tengo miedo a ese hijueputa, ¿ok? Ojalá me estuviera oyendo esa gonorrea, hijueputa, para que diera la matada que le voy a pegar. Mándeme decir a esa gonorrea de Coronel Martínez, que así se llama ese marica. Decirle a ese marica que no se la perdono nunca en la puta vida y que le pongo bombas en las caras de la familia, que lo acabo a esa gonorrea.
Martinez kept hunting. But the colonel wasn't working alone. In the shadows, other hunters were gathered. The Americans, Murphy and Pena. 2 DEA agents would become the American faces of the hunt. Steve Murphy arrived in Colombia in 1991 after 4 years working undercover stings in Miami. He had seen what Escobar's cocaine was doing to American cities. This wasn't just a job for him. It was personal.
He was responsible for 80% of the cocaine that was reaching the world. We had never seen a trafficker of this magnitude, very, very wealthy, and he employed violence.
Javier Pena had been stationed in Bogota since 1988, volunteering for what everyone knew was a dangerous assignment. His specialty was cultivating informants, building networks of people willing to risk their lives to betray Pablo Escobar. During the hunt, 5 of Pena's informants were murdered. Both agents lived on the Carlos Holguin police base in Medellin alongside their Colombian counterparts for the final 18 months of the manhunt. They ate the same food, dodged the same bullets, attended the same funerals. Escobar put $300,000 bounties on their heads. He knew them by name, but Murphy and Pena were just the face of American involvement. The real power, the cutting-edge technology that would ultimately find Escobar, operated from the shadows. Centra Spike, Hunters in the Sky. The most sophisticated element of the hunt had a code name, Centra Spike. It was the field designation for the Intelligence Support Activity, a secret army unit under Joint Special Operations Command. These were ghosts. Their very existence was classified. Their operators worked from the 5th floor of the US Embassy in Bogota and flew specially modified Beechcraft aircraft loaded with direction-finding equipment. To look at these planes, you'd notice nothing unusual. Maybe the wingspan was about 6 inches longer than standard, but that was it. That's where they hid the primary antennas. Additional antennas could be lowered from the belly during flight. When Centra Spike tracked phone signals, they could pinpoint locations within 200 meters. 200 meters in a city of millions. The CIA had a rival program called Majestic Eagle that could get no closer than 4 miles. When both teams were tested in a head-to-head competition, Centra Spike's superiority was so decisive that Majestic Eagle withdrew from Colombian operations entirely. And then there was Delta Force. Delta, the hunters on the ground. America's premier Special Operations Unit arrived in Colombia after Escobar's escape. Officially, they were limited to training and advising. They ran search block recruits through 3-week assault courses. They established sniper observation posts overlooking the Medellin Valley. The initial team included Lieutenant Colonel Gary Harrell, the squadron leader, and operators like Sergeant First Class Joe Vega and Sergeant First Class Tony Mafnas. Officially, all operations had to have a Colombian face. But as one account noted, aggressive operators found ways to be included on their trainees' missions. I mean, they could hardly sit back and sip coffee while search block personnel did all the dangerous work. To this day, the question of whether an American fired the shot that killed Pablo Escobar has never been definitively answered. Mark Bowden, who wrote the definitive book on the manhunt, drops tantalizing hints of US involvement. Delta commander Jerry Boykin explicitly denied it. A professor named Bruce Bagley claimed he was told by a very reliable source that it was actually the DEA that killed him. We may never know. But what we do know is this. The official hunters, the ones operating within the law, were only part of the story. Because in early 1993, something else emerged from the shadows of Medellin, something that would transform the hunt from a law enforcement operation into something much darker. They called themselves Los Pepes. Bodies started appearing across Medellin in early 1993. Each one came with a note: Los Pepes, perseguidos por Pablo Escobar. The people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. The name was almost poetic, suggesting victims fighting back against their tormentor. But there was nothing poetic about what they did. Within the first 3 weeks of their emergence, Los Pepes murdered more than 40 people connected to Escobar. At their peak, they killed 5 or 6 people per day. Their targets included lawyers, one of whom was shot 25 times while strolling with his brother, accountants, financial managers, sicarios, often hung publicly with exclamatory signs around their necks. Family members, including Escobar's brother-in-law, corrupt police on his payroll. They burned his properties. A warehouse containing $4 million in antique cars went up in flames. Haciendas, artwork by Picasso and Dali, destroyed. The violence was systematic. A 51-year-old attorney named Guado Parra and his 16-year-old son were kidnapped by 15 gunmen and found shot in the trunk of a stolen taxi. The note read, "What do you think of the trade for the bombing in Bogota, Pablo?" By the end of 1993, over 300 people associated with Escobar had been killed. So who were the Los Pepes? So remember Galliano and Moncada, the lieutenants Escobar murdered with a billiard cue inside La Catedral. Their widows became the driving force behind Los Pepes. Particularly Judy Moncada, a woman who had lost everything to Pablo Escobar's paranoia. She was flown to Washington, D.C. for debriefing and provided critical intelligence on cartel operations. She had the motive, she had the knowledge, but she didn't have the muscle. That came from the Castano brothers, Fidel and Carlos. Their father had been kidnapped and killed by FARC guerrillas years earlier, fueling a hatred of anyone they considered terrorists. They had built a paramilitary organization in the Colombian countryside, funded by drug money and political alliances. They were killers on an industrial scale, and they were joined by a man named Diego Murillo Bejarano. You might know him as his nickname, Don Berna. Don Berna had been Escobar's own security chief. He had worked for the Gallianos before their murder. He knew Escobar's operation from the inside. Now he became the operational commander of the death squad hunting his former boss. But the widows and paramilitaries don't fund themselves. The real money behind Los Pepes came from Escobar's bitter rivals, the Cali cartel. Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orihuela had been at war with Escobar for years. They were businessmen where he was a terrorist. They preferred bribes to bombs, but they wanted the same thing he wanted, control of the cocaine trade. With Escobar gone, the Cali cartel could control 80 to 90% of the global cocaine market. That is worth investing in. They provided at least $30 million to Los Pepes. Their security chief helped plan assassination attempts. They were drug lords funding death squads to kill a drug lord, while the Colombian government and American intelligence looked the other way. Now, here's where the story gets truly uncomfortable, because Los Pepes didn't just operate alongside the official hunt, they were intertwined with it. Declassified US documents reveal the extent of the collaboration. An August 1993 cable titled Unraveling the Pepes' Tangled Web reported that a Colombian prosecutor had new, very good evidence linking key members of the police task force to criminal activities and human rights abuses committed by Los Pepes. The police director general admitted he had directed a senior intelligence officer to maintain contact with Fidel Castano for the purposes of intelligence collection. DEA agent Javier Pena later acknowledged that Don Berna walked around the search block base like he owned the place. He was an informant for the Colombian National Police. Only years later did Pena discover the full truth. Don Berna was actually the one leading the hit squad. The CIA investigated whether US intelligence was being shared with Los Pepes. A blue ribbon panel looked into the allegations. Their investigation concluded on December 3rd, 1993, the day after Escobar was killed. Their conclusion remains classified. A congressional staffer who reviewed the case called it one of the most bizarre stories he had ever heard. He questioned why the CIA was allowed to investigate itself. Steve Murphy, one of the DEA agents at the heart of the hunt, would later reflect on the moral complexity of what they did. Los Pepes is nothing more than a murderous group of vigilantes, every bit as evil as Pablo Escobar. Then he added, but the truth is, gentlemen, they had a lot to do with taking down Pablo Escobar. For 16 months, Pablo Escobar lived as a ghost. He never stayed in one location for more than 2 consecutive nights. He moved through safe houses with secret rooms carved out between walls, under stairs and underground. His cousin Roberto claimed Pablo once rode in a coffin, playing dead to pass through checkpoints. He disguised himself as a woman. He grew a full beard and let his hair go wild until he became completely unrecognizable from the clean-shaven man in all the photos. He lost weight, developed gastritis. At his death, they found ulcer medicine among his belongings. The king of cocaine was being hunted to death. The manhunt systematically dismantled everything Escobar had built. By October 1992, his last chief of bodyguards, a man called El Angelito, had been killed. Search Block and Los Pepes together eliminated 26 of his closest collaborators. His lawyers, his bankers, his sicarios, one by one, they fell. 30 of the original 200 search block members died in the first 2 weeks of the renewed hunt. Escobar's bounties, remember, still paid $100 to $3,000 per dead cop. But Colonel Martinez kept recruiting, kept training, kept hunting. A traitor within search block headquarters was discovered leaking coordinates to Escobar. Well, that explained why raids consistently arrived to find coffee still warm. The drug lord had been escaping by minutes. By July 1993, Martinez was exhausted. He offered to step aside. His superiors had already picked a replacement. But then something changed. His son joined the hunt.
Escobar was talking on a phone to his son, and he was standing at one of these windows, and the police van rolled up the street here. They were monitoring the conversation.
Hugo Martinez Jr. was a radio surveillance specialist who requested transfer to the search block. His father was the man Escobar had sworn to kill until the third generation. His family had already survived a bombing, and now he would hunt the man who threatened them. The American had provided CIA direction, finding equipment that could track radio and phone signals. Hugo Jr. spent his days in an unmarked van, cruising the streets of Medellin, listening for a voice he'd never heard but would recognize instantly. Because Pablo Escobar had a fatal flaw. He couldn't stop calling his family. Escobar knew the rules. Calls exceeding 2 minutes could be triangulated. His communications operated in 120 to 140 megahertz range. After authorities banned cell phones in Medellin, he was forced to take line-of-sight positions in the hills to use radio phones. He rotated through approximately 20 different frequencies, but none of that mattered if he stayed on the line too long. And he couldn't help himself. He called his wife, he called his children. Sometimes he disguised his voice as a journalist to speak with his son. Each call was a risk. Each call could be his last. The most powerful drug lord in history, a man who had murdered thousands, was undone by the same thing that makes anyone human. He loved his family. November 1993, Escobar's family made a desperate attempt to escape Colombia. His wife Maria Victoria and children Juan Pablo, now 16, and Manuela, just 9 years old, applied for US visas. Refused. President Gaviria had seen to that. On November 26th, a convoy of 20 vehicles and 2 helicopters escorted them to the Medellin airport, then to Bogota, then onto a Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt. 2 DEA agents were on board. Germany held them on the tarmac for 4 hours. An Interior Ministry spokesperson announced the verdict. The Escobars are undesirables in Germany. They were denied asylum and deported on November 29th. Back to Colombia, the family was confined to room 2908 at the Hotel Tequendama Residences in Bogota, a building belonging to the retirement fund of the military forces. Every phone in that room was tapped. Juan Pablo later reflected on what Germany's rejection meant to his father. After that moment, Pablo saw only 2 possible outcomes. Either he would die himself or members of his family eventually killed by Los Pepes. The circle was closing. His lawyers were dead. His sicarios were dead. His money was burning. His family was trapped in a hotel room 1,000 kilometers away. By his final weeks, only one bodyguard remained. Alvaro de Jesus Agudelo, alias Limon. He had been Roberto Escobar's driver. Now, he was all that stood between the most powerful drug lord in history and the hundreds of people hunting him. One man against an army. Pablo Escobar celebrated his 44th birthday on December 1st, 1993, his 499th day as a fugitive. He was accompanied by his mother, Himilda, his cousin Luzmila and Limon. They allegedly shared cake, wine, and marijuana. A quiet celebration for a man who once threw parties that cost millions. He had arrived at the final safe house in the Los Olivos neighborhood approximately 15 days earlier. The address, Carrera 79B, number 45D-94, a 2-story row house facing a canal in a middle-class area. Nothing special, nothing that would draw attention. The next morning, December 2nd, Pablo picked up the phone. The first call to the Hotel Tequendama stayed under 2 minutes. Not enough for triangulation. but Pablo promised his son he would call back. The second call proved fatal. Hugo Martinez Jr., working with CIA, provided equipment in an unmarked van, monitored the frequency. Somewhere in the surveillance network, an officer handling the switchboard at Search Block headquarters made a call of his own. "I've got him." In the hotel room, Juan Pablo felt something wrong. Some instinct, honed by years of living under threat. He warned his father, "You need to hang up, Dad." Pablo stayed on. The last call lasted over 2 minutes. The triangulation system locked onto a neighborhood, a street, then a building. A Search Block officer passing in a truck while tracing the signal spotted a man through the second-floor window. The figure had long hair and a full beard. He looked nothing like the photographs, but something about the way he held himself, something about the way he watched the street, it had to be him. A Search Block force of 10 to 15 men converged on the house. They blasted through the front door using explosives. Escobar and Limon didn't try to fight their way out the front. They fled through a back window onto the terracotta rooftop. Their goal was the street behind the row of houses. Limon was hit multiple times and plunged to the ground below. Pablo ran, barefoot across the rooftops. Search Block officers opened fire. 3 bullets struck him. 1 hit his leg below the left knee. 1 penetrated his upper right back, and 1, the fatal shot, entered his right ear. They found him carrying 2 pistols, a Sig Sauer, the same weapon he had surrendered when entering La Catedral in 1991, and a Glock still holstered on his body. He never got off a shot. The famous image shows Escobar's bloody body sprawled face down on red roof tiles. He's barefoot. His blue jeans are hiked up, revealing pale legs. Search Block officers surround him, posing for the camera. Police reportedly shaved the Hitler moustache onto his face for the photographs. One final humiliation for a man who had humiliated an entire nation. "Viva Colombia!" a Search Block soldier screamed. "We have just killed Pablo Escobar."
Viva Colombia! We've just killed Pablo Escobar!
Who fired the fatal shot? The question has never been definitively answered. The official version, Colombian Search Block officers killed him during the rooftop pursuit. The family's claim, Juan Pablo, now living under the name Sebastian Morocuen, insists his father committed suicide. He points out that Pablo had always said he would shoot himself through the ears rather than be captured. The fatal shot entered his right ear. The Los Pepes theory? Don Berner claims his brother Rodolfo fired the killing shot. The American involvement theory, Mark Bowden's book, hints at US participation. Professor Bruce Bagley claimed DEA sources confirmed it. DEA agent Steve Murphy photographed the body. His picture showed no gunpowder residue near the ear wound, which would be inconsistent with a point-blank self-inflicted shot. But it's not conclusive. The truth is, in the chaos of that rooftop, the bullets flying from multiple directions, we may never know who killed Pablo Escobar. Perhaps that's fitting. It took a city, a country, a continent to bring him down. The kill belonged to everyone and to no one. Over 25,000 people attended Pablo Escobar's funeral. One mourner told the New York Times, "He built houses and cared about the poor. In the future, people will go to his tomb to pray the way they would to a saint." Within months of his death, Medellin's murder rate dropped almost 80% because of one man's death. But the story didn't end there. It never does.
You just can't imagine the pressure that we felt had been lifted off our shoulders, much less how the Colombian National Police must have felt.
Colonel Hugo Martinez was promoted to general. He led the operation that captured Cali cartel boss Gilberto Rodriguez in 1995. He lived quietly in Bogota until his death on March 22, 2020 at the age of 78. His son, Hugo Martinez Jr., the young man whose surveillance work finally located Escobar, died in a car accident in 2003. The man who found the most wanted criminal in history never reached old age. Steve Murphy and Javier Pena left Colombia. They wrote a book. They consulted on a Netflix series that made Pablo Escobar a global cultural icon, and they still give interviews about the hunt. As for the others, the ones who operated in the shadows, Fidel Castano disappeared on January 6, 1994, just 1 month after Escobar's death. Officially, he was killed fighting guerrillas. Some believe his brother Carlos ordered his murder. Carlos Castano consolidated their paramilitary forces in the AUC, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. At its height, it controlled 2/3 of the country with 35,000 members. He admitted on television that 70% of AUC funding came from drug trafficking, the very thing they claimed to be fighting against. In 2004, as Carlos contemplated surrendering to US authorities, he was murdered on orders of his own brother, Vincent. Don Berna, the operational commander of Los Pepes. After Escobar's death, he took over the Oficina de Investigada, Escobar's former enforcement wing, and controlled Medellin's criminal underworld. His era of Don Bernabilidad actually reduced violence through centralized criminal governance. He rose to third in command of the AUC before demobilizing in 2003. In May 2008, he was extradited to the United States, the same fate Escobar had killed thousands to avoid. Don Berna pleaded guilty to importing multi-ton cocaine quantities and was sentenced to 31 years with a $4 million fine. He remains imprisoned, expected to be released in 2039. The Cali cartel, which had funded Los Pepes to eliminate their competition, became the next target. Gilberto Rodriguez was captured in '95, found hiding behind a television. His brother Miguel fell 2 months later. Both were eventually extradited and sentenced to 30 years. Gilberto died in federal prison in June 2022. Under a 2006 plea deal, the brother forfeited $2.1 billion in assets. The infrastructure Los Pepes created metastasized into something even worse than what it replaced. The AUC conducted massacres across Colombia while protecting drug trafficking operations. Even after it officially demobilized, successor groups emerged. The pattern established during the Escobar hunt, collaboration between Colombian security forces and paramilitary death squads, was replicated for decades. 6.9 million Colombians were displaced as a result. So what do we make of all of this? The hunt for Pablo Escobar was the largest and most expensive pursuit of a single criminal in history. It mobilized Colombian police, US special forces, rival cartels, and paramilitary death squads in an unprecedented alliance. The manhunt succeeded. Pablo Escobar is dead, but the questions it raised about justice, sovereignty, and acceptable means remain unanswered. A Colombian colonel, American special operations, death squad leaders financed by rival drug cartels, intelligence agencies from multiple nations, all combined to kill one man. And in doing so, they forged patterns that would shape Colombian violence for decades to come. Cooperation between state security forces and paramilitary criminals. Extrajudicial killing as a tool of policy. The willingness to ally with monsters against greater monsters. Escobar's death didn't end the cocaine trade. It fragmented it. Mexican organizations, particularly the Sinaloa cartel under Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, inherited the distribution routes that Escobar had pioneered. Colombia remains a major cocaine producer today. The constitutional ban on extradition that Escobar fought and killed for, it was reinstated in December 1997. Since then, hundreds of drug traffickers have been extradited to the United States. Pablo Escobar's son, Juan Pablo, now lives in Buenos Aires under the name Sebastian Marroquin. He's an architect. He spent decades trying to undo his father's mythology. In 2009, in a documentary called Sins of My Father, he sought forgiveness from the sons of Rodrigo Lara Bonilla and Luis Carlos Golan, the men his father had murdered. "My father was like any other father," he said, "but he doesn't excuse the carnage." And maybe that's the most honest thing anyone has said about this entire story. Pablo Escobar was a monster who built houses for the poor and murdered anyone who stood in his way. He was a loving father who threatened to kill children. He was a genius and a butcher, a Robin Hood and a terrorist, a man who controlled 80% of the world's cocaine and died running barefoot across a rooftop with ulcer medicine in his pocket. The men who hunted him were heroes and villains too. Incorruptible police officers who looked the other way while their death squads did their dirty work. American agents who stayed within the law while their intelligence flowed to killers who didn't. There are no clean hands in this story, only dirty ones, and dirtier ones still. That is the truth of hunting Pablo Escobar. You couldn't kill the monster without becoming something monstrous yourself. And maybe that's the point. Not that good triumphed over evil, but that when you fight evil long enough, the line between them starts to blur, until standing on that rooftop in Medellin surrounded by the people who killed him, it becomes impossible to tell where one ended and the other began.